Yeah. What kind of American folk hero earns his status by speaking out against high heels and raging about the health hazards of hot dogs? You know his name. It's Ralph Nader. He's father of this country's consumer movement. In almost 30 years of advocacy, he has created a national consciousness about product safety in almost all areas of our lives, from the cars we drive to where we work to what we buy and what we eat. His latest target is the U.S. airline industry, which is the subject of his new book, which I have in my hand, Collision Course, The Truth About Airline Safety, and I'm pleased to have him here. Welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Do you feel, because there's a new administration in Washington, that the consumer movement and those forces that you have been in part given impetus to and gave birth to, face a different climate now?
We hope so, but there's very little movement so far. Many of the appointments to head these health and safety agencies, like the Auto Safety Agency and others, have not been made yet. So Bush people are still in charge of many of the banking agencies and the Auto Safety Agency. And President Clinton has not enunciated a consumer policy yet.
Why not?
He's very preoccupied with one issue at a time.
Economics and but that's what everybody tells him to do too.
Yes, but he ought to be able to do more than one thing at once. I mean, other presidents have put out a number of policies at the same time. We ought to have a decent head of the Auto Safety Agency at a time when all kinds of new standards are going to be put into effect to save lives on the highway, long overdue standards.
Yeah. But haven't you gotten your lifelong battle to get airbags established in American cars?
Yeah, it took 19 years, and they're all going in now, standard equipment, increasingly for the passenger side as well as the driver's side. But it shouldn't have taken 19 years. A lot of people died in ways that they didn't have to.
And what kind of personal satisfaction does that bring you, Ralph?
Well, that's great. Obviously, you get letters from people saying, we were in a crash and we walked away, and and the same for seatbelts when seatbelts came.
The automobile industry fought it primarily because they said it cost too much or it was ineffective. They fought it because. Well, you tell me.
They fought it because of ego. Because in 1970-71, the head of GM was a big promoter of airbags and said they were going to be on all GM cars, vans, and light trucks by the fall of '74. But he had to retire at 65 years of age in 1973. And then the whole anti-regulatory mania swept the auto industry. And they didn't want one standard to succeed and give credibility to other safety and fuel efficiency standards, so they fought the airbag.
But is there now a new attitude about regulation on the part of the automobile industry that is reflected in what's happened in seatbelts? In airbags?
They now concede that safety sells.
Right.
And you see their ads.
So if you'd gone to the market, but Ralph, you would have been successful earlier.
Well, you see, safety sells.
You should have used the market.
No, actually, it all started with the government standards. It all started with GSA buying 5,500 airbag-equipped cars
from
Ford.
General Service Administration?
Yeah, for government employees.
Right.
And then when Ford offered it as options on Tempo and Topaz, along came Lee Iacocca. He did it in his Chrysler cars, and now they're all doing it.
Yeah.
But it started in Washington through consumer advocates.
Let me move to this book, Collision Course. What's the truth about airline safety?
The truth is that while the record statistically for fatalities is not getting much worse, the risk levels and the burdens on the system are. So this book is designed to encourage an attitude of prevention, of foreseeing, forestalling. Why wait for the crashes to occur? The air traffic control system is being modernized, and there are a lot of problems with it. In fact, the airport in Miami went out a few days ago. They lost their radar, they lost their telephones, they had to rush out and use cellular phones, these controllers. There are a lot of glitches. Mm-hmm. The aircraft are getting older. We have the oldest commercial aircraft fleet in the Western industrialized world. That means you've got fatigue failure risks, and you're not retrofitting your airlines with new safety standards, like fire retardant standards. Then there's a double standard between the commercial airline safety and the commuter airlines. There are more commuter airlines now, the feeder airlines. Mm-hmm. They don't have the stringent standards for against pilot fatigue. The pilots are overworked in the sense sometimes they only have 4 or 5 hours sleep before they have to get up and fly the next leg. And they don't have ground proximity warning systems to reduce the crashing into mountains and fog or hills and fog. So we have to worry about the growing commuter airline fleet. And then there are a lot of other problems. There's still the airport security problems. There's a problem dealing with crashworthiness of planes. Most people don't realize 80% of crashes have survivable prospects to them.
I want to get to that because you talked about
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I want to get to that. But let me just say, why do you think that so many airlines are not doing so well? What's the problem with deregulation, and what's the problem with the marketplace for airlines? And just recently, the president of American Airlines, which I assume always was doing better than most of them, announced that maybe we ought not be in this business the way it's going.
Well, deregulation basically is the sting that really harmed the airlines, because once deregulation occurred, the FAA became even weaker on safety standards, but even worse, it became weaker on financial fitness standards for the airlines. So the mergers, the acquisitions, the leverage buyouts, the corporate raiders playing around with airline companies as if they're financial musical chairs weakened the airline's financial stature, put them in huge debt, like U.S. Air has over $2 billion in debt, and they now have to pay a lot of interest on the debt. Therefore, they don't buy new aircraft and replace the aging fleet as much as they can. They cut corners on maintenance and inspections, etc., and they fight against any efforts by the government to upgrade their safety standards. So it is true that a lot of the airline safety problems have their roots in the Reagan-Bush years, which approved all the mergers and acquisitions and didn't object to a single one, and developed such a debt-ridden airline industry.
Knowing what you know, what precautions do you take when you fly?
Well, I like to sit on an aisle seat up near the front, number one, near an exit if possible, an exit row. I very carefully look at the exits and where they are. And now, of course, I know what the flight attendant's instructions are, and if you don't, you should listen. If I had a small child with me, I'd make sure I had the right child seat, because in turbulence, a little child can really bounce around. And I would demand as a citizen that smoke hoods be installed for each airline passenger. Our consumer group, the Aviation Consumer Action Group, which
Go ahead.
petitioned the FAA for smoke hoods, and in March the FAA turned it down. Now, what does a smoke hood do?
What is
it gives you
protection from the fireball that zips through the plane.
Well, the gases and the smoke, which asphyxiate people as they're struggling to get out in a survivable crash on takeoff and landing, and most of the crashes are takeoff and landing, that's what's killing people. If you had a smoke hood that could easily be put on, it would give you at least 4 to 5 more minutes of breathability so that you could get out, you wouldn't panic, etc. Now, the FAA says that all airlines can be evacuated in 90 seconds with half of the exits functioning. Nobody believes that in the airline industry. That's one of the no-law regulations of the FAA, part of their fantasy world. So we do need smoke hoods, and they're actually very. I have one right here, just to show you. You see how small it is?
Yeah, right. And it would just come like this, and
yeah. It would be put. Now, there are bulkier ones, to be sure, but once there's a big market for smoke hoods, they're going to be more innovative, and they're going to be more diminutive and more easily usable.
And this would give you 5 minutes, 45 minutes.
That's right.
Yeah. Let me, how about the kind of flights you take? I mean, do you fly at a certain time of day? Do you fly certain kinds of airlines?
I try to avoid commuter airlines because the pilots often are fatigued, and the standards, the technology maintenance standards aren't as good.
FAA, are they doing the job?
No. That's the thrust of this book, Collision Course. That's why we want...
That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point is that this book is not just written for pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, and business travelers. It's written for anyone who wants to reduce their anxiety level, increase their chances of survivability. But, you know, we all have citizen duties. Not everybody's going to be interested in airline safety. But if a few are, that's all the FAA often needs, is an organized public demand that tells them, get cracking. And what the FAA does is it waits for a disaster or 6 disasters, and then it says, well, I think we better have some de-icing standards. Or it waits for a number of crashes to occur, and they say, well, I think we better have ground proximity alert systems to avoid the collisions into the hills during fog, a plane. In other words, it doesn't foresee and forestall. It reacts, but very, very slowly.
Is it because they're overworked? They don't care? Their mindset is...
It's a captive agency. It's captive by the airline industry and the aircraft manufacturers who swarm over it, who get their executives appointed as officials of the FAA. You know, the new head of the FAA is a former head of Midway Airlines, which went out of business. His name is Mr. Hinson. One would think that the new head of the FAA would have had a proven record in aviation safety and experience, etc., instead of just being an airline executive.
But does that mean that Mr. Hinson is, by definition, because of experience, incapable of regulating the airlines? Some would argue, put a guy in there, who knows how the airlines work, and he'll know how to get something done.
If he had a proven record of commitment to safety and knowledge. Otherwise, this is a huge bureaucracy, Charlie, and it moves very slowly. And it has a dual mandate. It's supposed to promote the airline's progress and do safety. Often they conflict. We want to remove the promotion part of the FAA, put it over in Department of Commerce, and just have the FAA focus on safety.
I need to talk one other issue before I want to talk about a couple of personal things. One, NAFTA, you're against.
Yes.
Why are you against? That puts you there with Ross Perot and who else? Ross Perot says it's going to take jobs away from Americans. It'd be like it would suck all these jobs into Mexico. What do you say?
Well, first of all, I'm one of the few people who've read the agreement. It's over 1,100 pages. I'm sure Mickey Cantor hasn't read it. Most of these people.
Why am I not surprised?
Now there's some good things in NAFTA that reduce some tariffs, etc.
Right.
There's some very bad things that go way beyond trade, and in effect subject our health and safety standards, which are higher than most countries, to pull down pressure. For example, under the Canadian-U.S. trade agreement, the Canadians are suing the U.S., saying that our phase-out of asbestos is really a disguised way to keep out Quebec asbestos. It's a non-tariff trade barrier. It violates the treaty. So you see, the reason why we're phasing out asbestos is to save worker lives and consumer lives. But if we have tougher food standards, or if someone in California or Kansas is pushing a control over a certain toxic chemical, these trade agreements, the way they're written, allow other countries to say, we're violating the trade agreement, we're going to be penalized unless we repeal our laws. Otherwise, we're going to have a trade sanction applied to us. Now, that's what I object to. One, NAFTA was designed by the Bush people. It is still being negotiated by Bush holdovers under the Clinton administration. It needs to be sent back to the renegotiation board, which means it needs to be first defeated by Congress later this year. The problem with NAFTA is that it's all viewed as, on the one side it's going to increase exports and make Americans more jobs, etc. On the other side, it's like it's a disaster. All the jobs are going to go south. Probably the lower paying American jobs are going to be lost. A $6 an hour job compared to a $1 an hour job in Mexico.
Do it in Mexico.
Yeah. Secondly, the corn farmers in Mexico are going to be dispossessed in the millions. 20% of the people in Mexico rely on the corn economy. Our corn is extremely efficiently produced on our farms.
They can't compete.
They can't compete. They're going to head north, or they're going to head into the bigger cities in Mexico City, Guadalajara, with all the congestion and poverty there. The third thing is, and if we have a dispute under this trade agreement, it doesn't go to our courts. It goes to a tribunal that is relatively secret and is outside our legal system. So for a variety of reasons, and here's my main reason. When you have a modest democracy entering into an economic union with Mexico, which is really like a dictatorship, then you have the potential of cheating on their assurances that they're going to enforce their health, safety, and worker laws. And if they cheat, they undermine the entire integrity of the agreement. And that's what I'm concerned about.
Ralph Nader, Collision Courses, The Truth About Airline Safety, a book that gives you a lot of perspective on what's happening to American airlines. Also, Ralph is involved in NAFTA, and it's always good to see him, and I thank you for coming by.
Thank you, Charlie.
We thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next time.